The monster who fed on despair found salvation in the one thing he could never consume, a child's unshakable faith. The alley smelled of rot and rain. Nikolai Ashford had not wept in 317 years. He had forgotten the sensation entirely, forgotten what it meant to feel the hot sting behind his eyes, the tremor in his chest that preceded human grief. He was no longer human. He was appetite. He was shadow. He was the thing mothers warned their children about when darkness fell too quickly over cobblestone streets. But tonight, crouched in the filth of a London backstreet in the year 1847, something inside him fractured. The child should not have been there. She was small, perhaps 6, perhaps 7, wrapped in a threadbare coat that hung past her knees. Her feet were bare despite the November cold, and her face was streaked with grime and tears. She stood at the mouth of the alley, illuminated by distant lamplight, staring directly at him. Nikolai pressed himself deeper into the shadows, his body tense. He had just fed. The blood was still warm in his veins, borrowed heat from a man who had died quietly against the brick wall behind him. The body would be discovered at dawn. It always was. The child took a step forward. "Don't," Nikolai whispered, his voice hoarse from disuse. She stopped. Her eyes, wide and dark, did not waver. "You're hurt," she said. Nikolai laughed, a bitter sound that echoed against stone. Hurt. The word was absurd. He was beyond hurt. He was centuries past pain, past healing, past anything resembling mercy. "Go home," he said, "before something finds you." "Something already did," she replied. Her voice was small but steady. "You." He should have frightened her. He should have shown her his teeth, let his eyes flare red in the darkness, sent her screaming back to whatever hovel she called home. Instead, he remained still, watching as she moved closer, her bare feet silent on wet stone. "What's your name?" she asked. "It doesn't matter." "Mine's Clara." Clara. The name hung in the air between them like a prayer. She was close enough now that he could hear her heartbeat, small and quick, like a bird's. Close enough that he could smell the poverty on her skin, the hunger in her blood. She was malnourished, abandoned perhaps, or orphaned, like he had been once, before the darkness claimed him. "You're bleeding," Clara said, pointing to his hand. Nikolai glanced down. His palm was torn, a wound from the struggle with his prey. Already, it was healing, flesh knitting itself back together in the span of seconds. By morning, there would be no trace of injury. "I'm fine," he said. "My mother used to say that when she was dying," Clara replied. She wasn't fine either. The words struck him with unexpected force. She crouched beside him, this impossible child, this tiny creature who should have been terrified, and reached out to touch his hand. Her fingers were cold, human cold, real cold. "Don't touch me," Nikolai said, pulling away. "Why?" "Because I'm dangerous. You haven't hurt me. Yet." Clara tilted her head, studying him with an expression far too old for her face. "You're crying," she said softly. Nikolai froze. He brought his hand to his face and felt the wetness there. Tears, impossible tears, sliding down his cheeks like accusations. His breath hitched. The sensation was foreign, overwhelming, terrifying. "No," he whispered. "No, I don't—" "It's okay," Clara said. "My mother cried too, at the end. She said it meant she was still human." Nikolai looked at her, really looked at her, and saw something he had not seen in 3 centuries of hunting, feeding, surviving. He saw belief, not fear, not revulsion. Just simple, unshakable belief that he was something more than the monster he had become. "I'm not human," he said. "Then why are you crying?" He had no answer. The rain began to fall harder, cold drops hissing against stone. Clara shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Without thinking, Nikolai removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. The gesture felt alien, almost painful. "Thank you," she said. "You should go." "Where?" The question hung between them, unanswerable. She had nowhere to go. He could see it in her eyes, in the way she stood too still, as if any movement might shatter the fragile safety of this moment. Nikolai closed his eyes. This was madness. He was a predator. She was prey. That was the natural order. That was what he had become. But when he opened his eyes again, Clara was smiling at him, a small, tired smile that spoke of exhaustion and trust in equal measure. "You're not evil," she said. And Nikolai Ashford, the monster who had forgotten how to weep, felt something ancient and terrible crack open inside his chest. If you believe even monsters can be seen as something more, follow this journey into darkness and redemption. Nikolai's home was not a home. It was a mausoleum dressed in velvet and shadow, a townhouse in Mayfair that stood silent and shuttered, its windows covered with heavy drapes that had not been opened in decades. The furniture was old, expensive, and untouched. Dust gathered on surfaces like snow. The air smelled of decay and time. He had purchased the property in 1789 after the French Revolution had made it easy to acquire the estates of the executed. He had never considered it a home. It was simply a place to hide between hunts, a vault where he could sleep away the daylight hours and wake to feed again. Now, standing in the doorway with Clara beside him, he saw it for what it truly was, a grave for the living dead. "It's big," Clara said, her voice echoing in the empty foyer. Nikolai closed the door behind them, sealing them both inside. The sound of the lock engaging felt final, irrevocable. "There's a room upstairs," he said. "You can sleep there." Clara looked up at him, her small hand still clutching the edge of his coat. "Where will you sleep?" "I don't sleep. Everyone sleeps. Not everyone." She frowned, considering this. Then, "Are you sick?" The question was so innocent, so desperately human, that Nikolai almost laughed again. Sick. Yes. That was one word for what he was. "Something like that," he said. He led her up the grand staircase, his footsteps silent on worn carpet. Clara followed, her bare feet leaving small, dark prints on the dusty floor. He opened a door to what had once been a guest room, a space frozen in time, with a 4-poster bed and faded wallpaper depicting scenes of pastoral life. "You can stay here," Nikolai said. Clara walked to the bed and sat down, her legs dangling off the edge. She looked impossibly small in the vast room, a single point of warmth in an ocean of cold. "I'm hungry," she said quietly. Of course she was. He could hear the weakness in her heartbeat, see the pallor in her skin. She was starving. How long had she been on the streets? Days? Weeks? Nikolai hesitated. He had no food in this house. He had not needed food in 3 centuries. "I'll find something," he said. "Okay." He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. "Will you come back?" The question struck him with unexpected force. There was fear in her eyes now, not of him, but of being left alone, of being abandoned again. "Yes," he said. The word felt like a promise he had no right to make. The streets were dangerous at this hour, but not for him. Nikolai moved through the darkness like smoke, invisible to the drunks stumbling home from pubs and the prostitutes calling from doorways. He found a bakery with its deliveries waiting in the alley, bread, still warm, wrapped in cloth. He took what he needed without being seen. On his way back, he passed a shop window displaying children's shoes. He stopped, staring at the tiny boots lined up in rows. Clara's feet had been bare, bleeding. He had not thought of it until now. Before he could question the impulse, he broke the lock and entered the shop, selecting a pair of small leather boots and thick wool stockings. He left coins on the counter, more than enough to cover the cost, and disappeared back into the night. When he returned to the townhouse, Clara was exactly where he had left her, sitting on the edge of the bed, waiting. "I brought food," he said, holding out the bread. Her eyes widened. She took it with both hands and ate quickly, desperately, tears streaming down her face as she chewed. Nikolai watched, feeling something painful twist in his chest. When she finished, he handed her the boots. Clara stared at them for a long moment. Then she looked up at him, and her expression was one of such pure, bewildered gratitude that Nikolai had to turn away. "Thank you," she whispered. "Sleep," he said, his voice rough. "We'll figure out what to do in the morning." But as he turned to leave, Clara's voice stopped him again. "Can you stay? Just until I fall asleep?" Every instinct screamed at him to refuse. He was a predator. She was prey. This was dangerous. This was impossible. But he found himself sitting in the chair by the window, watching as Clara lay down, still wearing his coat, the boots clutched against her chest like treasures. "Tell me a story," she said sleepily. "I don't know any stories." "Then tell me about you, about when you were little." Nikolai closed his eyes. When he was little, when he was human, when his name had been different, and his mother had sung to him in a language he no longer remembered. "Once," he began quietly, "there was a boy who believed the world was good." "What happened to him?" Clara asked. Nikolai opened his eyes and looked at her. This child who saw him as something other than a monster, this impossible light in his endless darkness. "I don't know yet," he said. Clara smiled and closed her eyes, and for the first time in 317 years, Nikolai Ashford kept watch over something living, something worth protecting, something that made him remember what it felt like to be human. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these immortal confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. Clara had been in his house for 3 days, and Nikolai was beginning to understand that saving a life was infinitely more complicated than taking one. She needed things he could not provide: sunlight, warmth, laughter, hope. She needed a future. He existed in perpetual stasis, unchanging and unchangeable. What could he possibly offer her? Yet every night when he woke from his daylight sleep, that death-like stillness in the sealed chamber beneath the townhouse, he found evidence of her presence throughout the house. Small handprints on dusty furniture, the scent of soap from the bathroom, the sound of her humming echoing through empty halls. She was making his tomb feel alive. On the 4th night, he found her in his library. The room had been sealed for decades, its door locked, its contents forgotten. But Clara had found a way in. Perhaps the lock had been weak, perhaps she was simply persistent. And now she sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by open books, her face illuminated by candlelight. "You have so many stories," she said when she noticed him in the doorway. Nikolai stepped inside, his eyes adjusting to the flickering light. The books were old, some of them dating back to the 1600s. He had collected them obsessively in his first century of undeath, desperate to maintain some connection to human culture, human thought. Then he had given up. What was the point of stories when your own story had no ending? "Can you read?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "But I can look at the pictures. This one has a knight fighting a dragon. This one has a princess in a tower." She looked up at him. "Can you read?" "Yes. Will you read to me?" The request was so simple, so innocent, that Nikolai felt that strange tightness in his chest again, the sensation he was beginning to recognize as the ghost of emotion, the echo of humanity he thought he had lost forever. He sat down beside her, careful to maintain distance, and selected a book at random. It was a collection of fairy tales, illustrated with intricate woodcuts. He opened to a story about a cursed prince and began to read. Clara leaned against his arm as he spoke, her small body warm and trusting. Nikolai's voice, unused to such soft speaking, grew steadier as the story unfolded. He had forgotten how beautiful language could be when it wasn't used to manipulate or deceive. When he finished, Clara looked up at him with wide eyes. "The prince was saved by love," she said. "It's just a story." But it could be real, couldn't it? Nikolai wanted to tell her no. He wanted to explain that love did not save monsters, that curses were permanent, that fairy tales were lies told to comfort children in a cruel world. Instead, he said, "Perhaps." Clara smiled and returned to examining the pictures. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice softer now. "Why do you live alone?" "I'm different from other people." "Different how?" "I can't be in the sun, I don't eat food, I don't age." Clara processed this information with the strange acceptance of childhood. Like in the stories? A curse? Yes, like a curse. Then someone has to break it. It can't be broken. How do you know? Because I've tried. The confession slipped out before he could stop it. And it was true. In the early decades of his transformation, he had searched desperately for a cure, consulting with scholars, priests, occultists, anyone who claimed knowledge of the supernatural. He had subjected himself to exorcisms, rituals, holy water, blessed blades. Nothing worked. The curse was absolute. Clara stood and walked to where he sat. She placed her small hand on his face, her touch gentle. "You're cold," she said. "I know. But you're not mean. You're not scary." "I should be." "But you're not." She said it with such certainty, such unshakable faith, that Nikolai felt something break inside him, some wall he had built brick by careful brick over centuries. "Why don't you fear me?" he whispered. Clara tilted her head, thinking, "Because you cry, because you brought me food, because you read me stories." She paused. "Because you're sad, and sad people aren't evil. They're just hurt." Nikolai closed his eyes against the sting of tears, those impossible, terrible tears that would not stop coming now that they had started. "I've done terrible things," he said. "Then do better things now." It was so simple, so devastatingly, impossibly simple. As if 300 years of murder could be erased by choosing differently. As if monsters could simply decide to stop being monsters. "I don't know how," he admitted. Clara took his hand in both of hers. "I'll teach you." And Nikolai Ashford, the vampire who had forgotten what redemption felt like, allowed himself to believe, for just one moment, that perhaps it was not too late. "Tell me how it happened," Clara said one evening as they sat together in the library. Nikolai had been reading to her from a book of poetry, Wordsworth, full of nature and innocence and things he could no longer touch. He stopped mid-sentence, the book heavy in his hands. What happened? How you became cursed." He should have refused, should have changed the subject, diverted her curiosity the way he had learned to divert every question that might lead to truth. But something in Clara's eyes, that steady, unflinching gaze, made lying impossible. "It was 1530, he began slowly. "I was 23 years old. I was studying medicine in Prague." Clara settled into the cushions, listening with the intense focus children bring to stories. "I wanted to heal people," Nikolai continued. "I believed that science could cure any illness, solve any problem. I was arrogant, brilliant perhaps, but arrogant." He paused. Then the plague came. He could still remember the smell of death in those streets, burning flesh, rotting bodies, the sweet-sick odor of mass graves. He had worked himself to exhaustion trying to save people, bleeding and purging and praying, watching them die anyway. "There was a woman," he said. "She came to me in the night. She said she could give me the power to never lose another patient, to heal with certainty, to conquer death itself." "Was she a witch?" Clara asked. "She was a vampire, though I didn't know that word then. I knew only that she offered me immortality, and I was foolish enough to believe immortality meant saving lives forever." He had accepted her offer without understanding the cost. The transformation had been agony. 3 days of dying slowly, his human body rejecting the curse even as it took root in his blood. When he woke, everything had changed. "I couldn't go out in daylight," Nikolai said. "Food tasted like ash. And I was hungry, constantly, desperately hungry, not for bread or meat, but for blood." "Did you kill people?" Clara asked quietly. The question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. "Yes," Nikolai said. "I killed people, hundreds of people. I told myself I was only taking criminals, only feeding on the guilty. But that was a lie I told myself to sleep through the daylight hours." He looked at Clara, forcing himself not to look away from her gaze. "I am a monster, Clara. That's the truth." He expected revulsion, expected her to flee, to scream, to finally understand what she had invited into her life. Instead, Clara moved closer. "But you stopped," she said. "What?" "You stopped killing. That's why you're so sad. Because you remember what you did, and you wish you could take it back." Nikolai stared at her. How could she see him so clearly? How could this child understand what centuries of living had taught him to hide? "I stopped 50 years ago," he admitted. I couldn't justify it anymore. The hunger is still there, always. But I found other ways. Animals. The dying. I take only enough to survive. Only from those who are already leaving." "That's better," Clara said simply. "It's not enough." "Maybe not, but it's something." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and Nikolai felt the warmth of her there. Living warmth, human warmth, the kind he would never possess again. "Do you hate her?" Clara asked. "The woman who cursed you?" Nikolai considered the question. For centuries, he had blamed her for the transformation, for the hunger, for every death on his hands. But now, after so long, he wasn't sure. "I hate what I became," he said, "but she didn't force me. I chose it. I thought I was choosing life. I was choosing death." "You're still alive, though," Clara said, "even if you're different." "Am I? What kind of life is this? Existing in shadows, hiding from the sun, watching the world change while I remain the same? I don't age, Clara. I don't change. I'm frozen in the moment I died." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My mother told me something before she died. She said being alive isn't about breathing. It's about caring, about loving someone enough that their happiness matters more than your own." "Your mother was wise. She was scared, but she loved me anyway." Clara looked up at him. "I think you're scared too. But you're still trying to be good. That means you're still alive." Nikolai felt tears sliding down his face again, that strange, painful sensation he was beginning to accept as permanent now. "I don't know how to be good," he whispered. "Yes, you do. You're doing it right now." And in that moment, sitting in a library full of forgotten stories, with a child who saw him not as a monster, but as someone worth saving, Nikolai Ashford understood something he had not understood in 3 centuries. Redemption was not about erasing the past. It was about choosing differently in every moment that followed. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For seeing me." Clara smiled. "You're easy to see. You're right there." And for the first time in 300 years, Nikolai wondered if perhaps he was. Winter deepened over London, and with it came new dangers. Clara had been with Nikolai for nearly 2 months now. She had gained weight, her cheeks filling out with regular meals. Her feet had healed inside the boots he had stolen for her. She laughed more often, bright, clear laughter that echoed through the townhouse like bells. But Nikolai knew this peace was temporary. The world was not kind to abandoned children. Eventually, someone would ask questions. The neighbors, though Nikolai kept to himself so thoroughly that few knew he existed, might notice lights in windows that had been dark for years. Or worse, Clara might venture outside during the day and be spotted by the wrong people. Workhouses existed to swallow children like her, or worse, institutions. He needed to plan, to think, to find a solution that did not end with her being torn from the only safety she had known in months. But every plan he considered felt inadequate. "You're worrying again," Clara said one evening. They were in the kitchen, another room Nikolai had barely entered in decades. Clara had discovered the space and declared it useful, though there was no stove lit, no food prepared, just two figures sitting at a table meant for servants long since dismissed. "I'm always worrying," Nikolai replied. "About me?" "Yes," Clara frowned. "I'm fine. For now, but you need things I cannot provide. Schooling, friends, sunlight. I don't need sunlight. You're human. You need sunlight. Then you come with me. In the day." Nikolai shook his head. "I would burn. The sun is poison to me." Clara absorbed this with her characteristic thoughtfulness. "What if you wore very thick clothes and a hat?" "It wouldn't be enough." "Have you tried?" The question caught him off guard. Had he tried? In the early years, yes. Desperate experiments that had left him scarred and weakened. But not recently, not in over a century. "It's too dangerous," he said. "Everything's dangerous. You still try." She wasn't wrong. Existing at all was dangerous for him. Feeding without killing required extraordinary control. Moving through human society without revealing his nature demanded constant vigilance. He had spent 3 centuries managing impossible risks. But this felt different. This felt like hope, and hope was the most dangerous thing of all. "I'll consider it," he said finally. Clara beamed. "Good, because I want to show you something." "What?" "The park. There's a park near here. I used to sleep there sometimes before you found me. There are trees and birds and a pond. It's beautiful in the sunlight." "Clara, please, I want to see it with you. I want you to see something beautiful that isn't inside this house." Nikolai looked at her, this child who had invaded his tomb and filled it with life, who believed impossible things because she had not yet learned that impossibility was real. "I'll try," he said, "but I make no promises. That's all I'm asking." He prepared meticulously. 3 layers of thick wool clothing, covered by a heavy cloak. Leather gloves that extended past his wrists. A wide-brimmed hat that cast his face in shadow. Spectacles with darkened glass. Bandages beneath it all, protecting every inch of exposed skin. Clara watched his preparations with fascination. "You look like a mummy," she said. "I feel like one." "Will it hurt?" "Probably." "Then why are you doing it?" Nikolai paused, his hand stilling on the final layer of wrapping. Why was he doing this? For her? For himself? For some desperate need to prove he could still participate in the daylight world, even briefly? "Because you asked," he said finally. They waited until late afternoon, when the winter sun hung low and weak in the sky. Nikolai stood before the door, that threshold between his shadowed existence and the burning world beyond, and felt something very close to fear. "Ready?" Clara asked, taking his heavily gloved hand in hers. "No," he admitted. "Me neither. Let's go anyway." She opened the door. Sunlight spilled across the threshold, and Nikolai felt it immediately, not the full burning agony of direct exposure, but a prickling sensation, like static electricity across his skin. The layers protected him, but barely. He could feel his body recoiling, every instinct screaming at him to retreat back into darkness. Clara squeezed his hand. "You can do it." He took one step, then another. The pain increased, a low, constant burning that made his jaw clench, but it was bearable, just barely. They walked slowly down the street, Clara matching his careful pace. She guided him toward the park she had described, talking the entire way, pointing out shops and houses and people, filling the silence with her observations. Nikolai heard her voice as if from a distance. All his focus was on maintaining control, on not letting the pain overwhelm him, on continuing to place one foot in front of the other. When they reached the park, Clara led him to a bench beneath a large oak tree. The branches filtered the weakening sunlight, creating patterns of light and shadow on the ground. "See?" Clara said, settling beside him. "Beautiful." Nikolai looked around through his darkened spectacles. The park was indeed beautiful. Winter bare trees standing like sentinels, birds calling to each other in the cold air, a pond reflecting the gray sky like polished steel. But more beautiful than any of it was Clara's face, her expression of pure joy at this simple moment, this shared experience. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For reminding me what beauty looks like." Clara leaned against him, careful not to disturb his layers of protection. "You can feel it, can't you? The sun?" "Yes." "Does it hurt?" "Yes." "But you're here anyway." "Yes. That's very brave." Nikolai almost laughed. Brave. He had faced down mobs, survived wars, hunted in the darkest corners of the world. But this, sitting on a bench in a park with a child, enduring mild sunlight for the sake of her happiness, this felt like the bravest thing he had ever done. They sat together until the sun began to set, until the pain faded to a dull ache, until Clara declared she was ready to go home. Home. She had called his tomb a home. And walking back through the twilight streets, Nikolai realized that perhaps it was. Not because of the building itself, but because someone waited there for him, because someone cared whether he returned, because for the first time in 300 years he had somewhere and someone worth returning to. If this story has already captured you, leave a like. It helps the voices of those who chose eternity reach more hearts. Spring came slowly to London, but it came. Clara had been with Nikolai for 5 months now. 5 months of stolen moments, of stories read by candlelight, of carefully managed daylight excursions. 5 months of learning that perhaps he was not as irredeemable as he had believed. But with spring came visitors. Nikolai smelled them before he heard them. 2 men standing at his door in the late afternoon. Officials of some kind. Their clothing marked them as administrators, bureaucrats. The kind of men who tracked down missing children and unclaimed properties. He had known this moment would come, had dreaded it with every fiber of his being. "Mr. Ashford?" one of them called, knocking firmly. Nikolai opened the door a crack, his face shadowed. "Yes?" "We're from the Parish Workhouse Board. We've had reports of a child seen in this area, a girl, approximately 7 years old. We're conducting inquiries." Behind him, Nikolai heard Clara's footsteps on the stairs. She had frozen, listening. "I'm afraid I can't help you," Nikolai said. "I live alone." The official frowned. "Sir, we have witnesses who have seen a child entering and leaving this property. If you're harboring a ward of the state without proper documentation..." "I'm not harboring anyone." "Then you won't mind if we search the premises." Nikolai's hand tightened on the door. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to slam the door, to protect what was his. But he knew the law, knew that resistance would only bring more attention, more scrutiny. And then Clara stepped into view. She walked down the stairs with her head held high, wearing the dress Nikolai had purchased for her hair neatly braided. She looked nothing like the starving urchin from the alley. She looked cared for, loved. "I'm here," she said clearly. The official's eyes widened. "Miss, are you being held against your will?" "No." "Has this man hurt you?" "No, he saved me." "Where are your parents?" "Dead. I have no one except him." The lead official turned his attention back to Nikolai. "Sir, if you've taken in a child without proper authorization, that's a serious matter. The girl needs to be registered, enrolled in school, placed under appropriate guardianship. I am her guardian, Nikolai said. By whose authority? By my own. That's not how it works, sir. The child is a ward of the state. She needs to be processed through the proper channels, placed in the workhouse until suitable arrangements can be made. No, Clara said firmly. I'm not going to a workhouse. Child, it's for your own good. He's my family, Clara said, moving to stand beside Nikolai. She took his hand, that simple gesture of trust and defiance. He takes care of me. I'm safe here. The official looked between them, clearly uncertain. This was not a typical case. The child was obviously healthy, well-fed, well-clothed. The house, though strange and shadowed, showed no signs of neglect or abuse. Sir, the man said finally, if you wish to maintain custody, you'll need to apply for formal guardianship. There will be inspections, interviews, documentation. The board will need to verify that you can provide appropriate care. I understand, Nikolai said quietly. In the meantime, the child should come with us. No, Nikolai said, his voice sharp. She stays here. I will file the necessary paperwork. I will submit to your inspections, but she does not leave this house. The officials exchanged glances. Finally, the lead man nodded slowly. You have 2 weeks to begin the process. If you fail to comply, we'll return with constables. They left. Nikolai closed the door and leaned against it, his mind racing. Guardianship, documentation, inspections. How could he possibly? We'll figure it out, Clara said. He looked down at her. Clara, I'm not human. How can I convince anyone to grant me guardianship? The moment they investigate my background, they'll find nothing. No birth records, no employment, no references. I don't exist in any system they recognize. Then we make you exist. It's not that simple. It can be. Clara's expression was determined, the same expression she wore when she insisted on impossible things. People lie all the time. They pretend to be things they're not. We just need to pretend very well. Clara, you're a gentleman. You have money. You have this house. That's all they really care about. She squeezed his hand. And you have me. I'll tell them you're good. They'll believe me. Nikolai wanted to argue, wanted to explain all the ways this could go wrong, all the dangers of exposure, all the reasons this was impossible. But looking at Clara, this child who had taught him to cry, to hope, to believe in redemption, he found he couldn't speak those arguments aloud. I'll try, he said instead. That's all I ask. The next 2 weeks were a blur of forged documents and careful lies. Nikolai discovered that money could purchase a great deal of legitimacy. A solicitor, one who asked few questions, helped him create a false identity. Nikolai Ashford, wealthy recluse, recently returned from Eastern Europe, where he had been managing family estates. The story was thin, but plausible enough for bureaucrats who cared more about propriety than truth. Character references were purchased from former employers who existed only on paper. Financial records were fabricated to show stable income from overseas investments. Even a false birth certificate was produced, aged carefully to appear decades old. It was all deeply illegal. It was also necessary. When the officials returned for their first inspection, Nikolai was prepared. He showed them the house, carefully selected rooms that had been cleaned and furnished to suggest normal domestic life. He presented the documentation, speaking in the educated tones of a man accustomed to authority. He demonstrated that Clara had books to read, proper clothing, adequate space. And Clara herself was his greatest advocate. She spoke eloquently about her life in the house, about the care Nikolai provided, about how safe she felt. She recited poetry she had memorized, demonstrated basic arithmetic she had learned. She was every inch the well-mannered child of a respectable guardian. The officials could find no fault. Guardianship was granted. The day the official letter arrived, Clara threw her arms around Nikolai's waist and laughed, that bright, clear sound that had become the soundtrack of his new existence. "We did it," she said. "You did it," Nikolai corrected. "Your testimony convinced them. We did it together." She was right, of course. They had done it together, this impossible thing, this victory over a system designed to separate children from anyone who didn't fit the narrow definition of acceptable. That night, Nikolai sat in the library, holding the guardianship papers. Official recognition that Clara was his responsibility, his family. It was a lie, of course, built on forgery and deception, but it was also the truest thing he had done in 300 years. "What are you thinking about?" Clara asked, settling beside him with a book. "That I'm responsible for you now, officially. You were responsible for me before. But now it's real." "It was always real," Clara said. "The papers just made other people believe it." Nikolai looked at her, this child who saw through every deception to the truth beneath, and felt something he had not felt in centuries: purpose. He was no longer merely existing, hiding in shadows, waiting for time to end. He had a reason to face each night, a reason to continue, a reason to be better than what he had been. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For giving me a reason to try." Clara smiled and opened her book. "You already had a reason. You just needed someone to show you." And as they sat together in the candle-lit library, a vampire and a child, a monster and an innocent, two beings who should never have found each other, Nikolai understood that salvation sometimes came in the smallest packages. Sometimes it came in the form of a child who said, "You're not evil," and meant it with her whole heart. Years passed, not human years, quick, fleeting things that slipped through fingers like water. But vampire years, which stretched and compressed in strange ways, each one indistinguishable from the last until suddenly everything had changed. Clara was 10 now, then 12, then 14. Nikolai watched her grow with a mixture of wonder and terror. She learned to read fluently in 3 languages. She devoured his library, moving from fairy tales to philosophy to science with insatiable curiosity. She asked questions that forced him to think, to articulate beliefs he had stopped examining centuries ago. "Why do people fear death?" she asked one evening when she was 13. They were in the garden, a space Clara had insisted on reviving. Nikolai had hired workers, at night of course, to clear the overgrown wilderness that had once been formal grounds. Now roses grew there, and lavender and small trees that Clara tended with devotion. "Because death is the end," Nikolai said, "the final unknown. But you're not dead. You're still here. I'm not alive either." "Not really." Clara pulled a weed from the soil, considering. "Mother used to say that being alive meant caring about something beyond yourself. By that definition, you're very alive." "Your mother was wiser than I'll ever be. She was scared, like you. I'm not scared." Clara gave him a knowing look, that expression she had perfected over the years, the one that said she saw through every defense he constructed. "You're terrified," she said. "You're afraid I'll grow up and leave, that I'll realize what you are and reject you, that you'll hurt me somehow even though you never have." Nikolai said nothing. She was right, of course. The fear was constant now, a low hum beneath every moment they shared. Clara was becoming a young woman. Soon she would want things he couldn't provide: a normal life, human connections, a future that extended beyond his shadowed existence. "I'm not going anywhere," Clara said firmly. "You should. You deserve—" "I deserve to choose, and I choose this. I choose you." But Nikolai knew it wasn't that simple. The world would intrude. It always did. The first intrusion came in the form of a young man named Thomas Wright. He was a neighbor's son, 18, handsome, studying law at university. He had encountered Clara in the garden one afternoon and been immediately captivated. Nikolai watched from the window as Thomas talked to her, saw Clara laugh at something he said. Jealousy was a new emotion. Nikolai had not felt it in centuries, but it burned now with surprising intensity. That evening, Clara came inside with flowers Thomas had given her, common daisies, nothing special, but she placed them in water with such care that Nikolai felt his chest constrict. "He seems nice," she said casually. "I'm sure." He asked if I'd like to take a walk with him, during the day. Of course, during the day, when Nikolai could not follow, could not protect, could not be part of her experience. "What did you tell him?" Nikolai asked carefully. "That I'd think about it." She looked at him then, her expression unreadable. "Would you mind?" "Yes. Yes, I would mind. I would mind watching you grow close to someone who can give you everything I cannot. I would mind losing you to the daylight world where I cannot follow." "No," Nikolai said. "You should have friends, companions, a normal life." "I don't want a normal life." "You say that now. I mean it." Clara's voice was sharp. "I know what I want, Nikolai. I'm not a child anymore." And that was the problem, wasn't it? She wasn't a child. She was becoming a woman with desires and dreams that extended beyond his shadowed world. Eventually, she would want things he couldn't provide: marriage, children, a future that existed in sunlight. "Go for the walk," Nikolai said quietly. "Enjoy yourself." Clara studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded and left the room. She went on the walk, and then another. Thomas became a regular presence, arriving in the afternoons when Nikolai slept, leaving before sunset. Clara would tell Nikolai about their conversations, about the books Thomas recommended, about his plans to become a barrister. Nikolai listened and felt his world slowly fracturing. This was what he had wanted, wasn't it? For Clara to have a normal life, to connect with humans her own age, to find happiness beyond the walls of his tomb? But the reality of it was agonizing. One evening, Clara came to him with an expression he had learned to dread: determined, nervous, resolved. "Thomas asked me to marry him," she said. The words struck Nikolai like a physical blow. He had known this would come, had prepared himself for it, but preparation meant nothing when faced with the actual moment. "What did you say?" he asked, keeping his voice carefully neutral. "I said I needed time to think." "Do you love him?" "I care about him. He's kind. He's intelligent. He can give me things you can't." "Then accept," Nikolai said. "Build a life with him. Be happy." But what? "But I'll have to leave you." "Yes." Clara sat down heavily in the chair across from him. "I don't want to leave you. This is my home. You're my family." "I'm not your family. I'm a monster who kept you out of loneliness." "Don't." Her voice was sharp. "Don't diminish what we are to each other." "What are we, Clara?" Nikolai asked, suddenly tired. "I'm not your father. I'm not your brother. I'm something unnatural that will watch you age and die while I remain unchanged." "What future is that?" "It's the future I want." "You're 17. You don't know what you want." "I'm 17 and I've lived with you for 9 years. I know exactly what I want." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I want to stay here. I want to continue our life together. I want to grow old in this house, reading your books, tending the garden, being with you. And Thomas is wonderful, but he's not you." "Clara, I love you," she said simply. "Not like a father, not like a brother. I love you as you are, the vampire who wept when I called him good, who endured sunlight to see me happy, who taught me that monsters are just people who forgot how to be kind." Nikolai felt something break inside him, some final wall he had been maintaining to protect them both from this impossibility. "You can't love me," he whispered. "Too late. I'm dead, Clara. I'm a corpse animated by blood and curse. I can't give you children. I can't grow old with you. I can't even walk beside you in daylight without agony." "I know all of that." "Then how can you—" "Because you see me, all of me, the parts I'm proud of and the parts I'm ashamed of, You've never lied to me, never pretended to be something you're not. And when I look at you, I don't see a monster. I see someone who chose every single day to be better than what he was made to be." Tears were streaming down Nikolai's face now, those impossible tears that had become familiar over the years. "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you." "Maybe not, but you have me anyway." Clara crossed the space between them and took his cold hands in her warm ones. "I'm not asking you to change. I'm not asking for promises of forever. I'm just asking you to let me stay. Let me choose you. Let me love you, even if you can't love me back." "I do love you," Nikolai said, the confession breaking from him like blood from a wound. "I have loved you since the moment you said I wasn't evil. You are the only good thing I've done in 300 years. The only thing that makes existence bearable. Then let me stay." And Nikolai, who had survived centuries of loneliness, who had endured wars and plagues and the endless weight of immortality, finally surrendered. "Stay," he whispered. "Please stay." Clara smiled through her tears, always. And in that moment, in a shadowed library in London, a vampire and a human chose each other, not because it was easy, not because it made sense, but because love rarely cared about either of those things. Clara was 19 when she first asked the question Nikolai had been dreading. They were in the library. Where else? On a winter evening, much like the one 9 years ago when she had first entered his life. But everything was different now. She was no longer a starving child. She was a woman, educated, thoughtful, beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with physical appearance. She was reading medical texts. She had become fascinated with anatomy, with the mechanics of life and death. Nikolai suspected she was trying to understand what he was, to find some scientific explanation for his existence. "Is it possible?" she asked suddenly, looking up from her book. "Is what possible?" "Turning someone, making them like you." Nikolai's hands stilled on the pages of his own book. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I'm aging and you're not. Because eventually I'll die and you'll be alone again. Because I want more time with you than one human lifetime allows." "Clara, can it be done?" "Yes," Nikolai said quietly. "But then do it. Turn me." "No." The word was sharp, final. Clara flinched. "Why not?" "Because I love you," Nikolai said, "and I will not damn you to this existence." "It's not damnation if I'm choosing it." "You don't understand what you're choosing. Then explain it to me." Nikolai closed his book and looked at her. Really looked at her. She meant it. This wasn't idle curiosity or romantic fantasy. She had thought about this, probably for months, and come to a decision. "The transformation is agony," he began. 3 days of dying slowly, every cell in your body rejecting the change. Some people don't survive. Their minds break under the strain. I'm strong. You are. But strength isn't enough. He paused. If you survive, you'll wake up to hunger like you've never imagined. Constant, consuming. Every heartbeat you hear will sound like a dinner bell. Every human you encounter will smell like prey. You control it, barely, and it took me a century to learn. How many people do you think I killed in that time? How much blood is on my hands?" Clara said nothing. "You'll lose the sun," Nikolai continued. "You'll lose warm food, hot baths, the feeling of wind on your skin without pain. You'll lose the ability to age, to change, to die naturally. Every friend you make will grow old and die. Every person you love will eventually leave. You'll be frozen at 19 forever while the world moves on without you. I'd have you. For how long? What happens when you grow to resent me for this choice? When you realize what you've lost? I couldn't bear it, Clara. I couldn't bear watching you hate me for giving you what you asked for." Clara was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "You think I haven't considered all of this? I've watched you for 9 years, Nikolai. I've seen how you struggle, how you isolate yourself, how you carry centuries of guilt. I know exactly what I'd be choosing. Then why would you want it? Because the alternative is worse. The alternative is leaving you alone again. Going off to marry Thomas or someone like him, having children, growing old, dying, and knowing that you're still here, still alone, still suffering in this tomb you've built for yourself. That's not your responsibility. It is if I love you, and I do. Clara moved to kneel beside his chair. I'm not asking for immortality because I'm afraid of death. I'm asking for it because I want to spend eternity with you, because I want to help you carry the weight of existence, because I believe we could be happy together, even in darkness. Nikolai cupped her face in his hands, those cold, dead hands that would never warm. You deserve better than darkness, he whispered. I deserve to choose. And I choose you. I choose this. Clara, ask me in a year, she said. If I still want it in a year, if I've thought about it and understood all the consequences and I still choose immortality with you over mortality without you, will you do it then? Nikolai wanted to say no, wanted to refuse absolutely, to protect her from this choice. But looking into her eyes, those eyes that had seen him as human when he had forgotten what humanity meant, he found he couldn't. 1 year, he said, and if you change your mind, I won't. I'll help you build whatever life you want. I'll pay for your education. I'll provide a dowry if you choose to marry. I'll ensure you want for nothing. I only want you. 1 year, Nikolai repeated. Promise me you'll truly think about this. I promise. But even as she said it, Nikolai knew what her answer would be. He had known from the moment she asked the question. Clara had decided long ago. The year was a formality, a chance for him to prepare for the inevitable. She would choose darkness. She would choose eternity. She would choose him. And he would have to live with the knowledge that he had damned the only good thing in his existence to the same cursed half-life he endured. The year passed like water through fingers. Clara continued her studies, reading everything about vampirism she could find. Folklore, legends, medical theories. She approached her potential transformation with the same methodical intelligence she brought to everything. She told Thomas Wright that she could not marry him. The young man was heartbroken, but gracious. He wished her well and disappeared from their lives. Clara turned 20. She celebrated with Nikolai in the garden she had cultivated, surrounded by night-blooming flowers she had planted specifically because they thrived in darkness. Still sure? Nikolai asked as they sat beneath the stars. More sure than ever. You could still change your mind. I won't love you any less if you choose life. I am choosing life, just a different kind. 3 days before the year ended, Clara came to him with a leather journal. I've written everything down, she said. My reasons, my understanding of the consequences, my acceptance of what I'll lose and what I'll gain. I want you to read it. I want you to understand that this is not impulsive or romantic fantasy. This is a choice I'm making with full awareness. Nikolai read the journal that night while Clara slept. Page after page of careful analysis, philosophical reflection, and unwavering certainty. She had thought of everything, the practical concerns, the ethical implications, the potential regrets. And beneath it all, on every page, was love. Not the desperate, consuming love of youth, but the steady, enduring love of someone who had truly seen another person and chosen them anyway. When the year ended, Clara came to him at midnight. I haven't changed my mind, she said. I know. Will you do it? Nikolai looked at her, his Clara, his salvation, his reason for continuing, and felt the weight of 300 years of existence pressing down on him. Yes, he whispered. God forgive me, yes. Clara smiled. Then make me yours, forever. The transformation room was deep beneath the house, in cellars Nikolai had sealed decades ago. He had prepared it carefully over the past year, clean linens, water, herbs that folklore claimed eased the transition. None of it would truly help. The change was agony no matter the preparation. But it made him feel less helpless. Clara descended the stairs with steady steps, dressed in a simple white gown. She looked like a bride. She looked like a sacrifice. "Are you ready?" Nikolai asked, his voice rough. "Yes. Once I begin, there's no stopping. If you want to change your mind, I don't." Clara took his hand. "I trust you." Those 3 words nearly broke him. They sat together on the bed he had prepared. Clara's heartbeat was quick but steady, nervous but not afraid. She had spent the past week saying goodbye to sunlight, to warm food, to everything she would lose. She had made her peace. "It will hurt," Nikolai warned one final time. "I know. You might hate me." "Never. Clara, Nikolai." She cupped his face, her hands warm against his cold skin. "I love you. I've loved you since I was 7 years old, and you wept because I called you good. I will love you through this transformation, and every night that follows. Now please, give me eternity." Nikolai pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her, roses and soap and life. Then he tilted her head gently to the side, exposing the pulse point at her throat. "I love you," he whispered. "I know." He bit down. Clara gasped, but didn't pull away. Nikolai drank carefully, precisely, not to kill, but to drain her to the edge of death. He could feel her heartbeat slowing, feel her body growing cold in his arms. When she was close enough to death's door, he pulled back and bit his own wrist, opening a vein. Dark blood welled up, his cursed blood, thick with centuries of immortality. He pressed his wrist to Clara's mouth. "Drink," he commanded. She did. The change was immediate. Clara's body convulsed as the curse took root, as vampire blood spread through dying veins and began its terrible work of transformation. She screamed, a sound that would haunt Nikolai forever, and then her eyes rolled back and she went limp. Nikolai held her as her body died, held her through the seizures, the fever, the moments when she thrashed and wept and begged for death. He whispered to her constantly, apologies, promises, prayers to gods he no longer believed in. 3 days passed in agony. On the 3rd night, Clara's eyes opened. They were no longer brown. They were red, the color of fresh blood, the mark of new transformation. She stared at the ceiling, her face blank, and Nikolai felt terror unlike anything he had experienced in 3 centuries. "Clara?" he whispered. She turned her head slowly to look at him. For a moment, there was nothing in her expression, no recognition, no emotion, nothing human. Then she smiled. "Nikolai." His name on her lips was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Strange. Cold. Hungry." She sat up slowly, testing her new body. "Everything sounds so loud. I can hear your heartbeat. No, wait. You don't have a heartbeat. I can hear the rats in the walls, the wind outside, everything." The heightened senses will fade to manageable levels in a few weeks. And the hunger? That never fades, but it becomes manageable. Clara looked at her hands, pale now, bloodless. She touched her face, her throat where he had bitten her. The wound was already healed. "I can't feel my heart," she said quietly. "No, it stopped 3 days ago." "Am I dead?" "In a sense. And in a sense, you're more alive than you've ever been." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked at him with those new red eyes. "I don't regret it," she said. "You might. Later." "No." She reached for his hand. "I'm with you. That's all I wanted." Nikolai pulled her close, holding her as she adjusted to her new existence. She was cold now, as cold as he was. Dead flesh, undead life. But she was his. They were matched now. 2 creatures of darkness, bound by choice and love and transformation. "What happens now?" Clara asked. Now I teach you to hunt, to feed without killing, to exist in this cursed state with whatever grace we can manage. And after that? After that? Nikolai smiled, a real smile, the first in longer than he could remember. After that, we have eternity to figure out. Clara leaned against him, her body fitting perfectly against his. Tell me it gets easier. It does, slowly, but it does. And we'll face it together? Together. She looked up at him, her red eyes already showing hints of the brown they would become as the transformation settled. You know what this means, don't you? What? You're not alone anymore. You'll never be alone again. The words struck Nikolai with the force of revelation. She was right. For 300 years, he had been isolated, watching civilizations rise and fall, watching everyone he knew age and die while he remained unchanged. He had believed loneliness was the permanent price of immortality. But now he had Clara, his Clara, not human anymore, not innocent, not untouched by darkness, but his, chosen, eternal. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For seeing me, for loving me, for choosing this. Thank you for letting me. They sat together in the transformation room as Clara adjusted to her new senses, her new hunger, her new existence. Outside, dawn was breaking, a dawn neither of them would see, but that was acceptable. They had traded sunlight for each other, and in the darkness of that sealed room, two immortals held each other and understood what humanity had always known. That love, real love, the kind worth dying for, was the only thing that made eternity bearable. Epilogue. 70 years later. The garden was in full bloom. Clara knelt among the roses, night roses, moonflowers, evening primrose, all the flowers that opened in darkness. She had spent 7 decades perfecting this garden, learning which plants thrived without sunlight, which ones could be coaxed into blooming beneath stars instead of sun. Nikolai watched her from the doorway, still marveling at the sight of her. She looked exactly as she had at 20, frozen in that moment of transformation, eternally young. But her eyes held centuries now. She moved with the confidence of an immortal who had made peace with what she was. Are you going to stand there all night? Or will you help me with these weeds? Clara called, without turning around. Nikolai smiled and joined her in the garden. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that only came from spending decades together, learning each other's rhythms, becoming extensions of one another. I've been thinking, Clara said eventually, about the child who said I wasn't evil. I wonder what happened to her. She grew up, chose immortality, spent 70 years with a monster who loves her. Not a monster. Clara looked at him, her eyes, brown now, fully human-looking except in moments of hunger, soft with affection. Never a monster, just someone who forgot for a while how to be kind. You taught me. We taught each other. She was right, of course. Their first decades together had been difficult, teaching Clara to hunt, helping her manage the hunger, supporting her through the moments when she missed sunlight so badly she wept blood tears. But they had survived it together, and in teaching her, Nikolai had learned things about himself. That control was possible, that mercy could be chosen, that immortality didn't have to mean isolation. Do you regret it? He asked, the question he had asked 1,000 times over the decades. Never, Clara replied, the answer she had given every single time. Not even a little? Not even a little. She stood and brushed soil from her dress. I miss the sun sometimes. I miss warm food. I miss the feeling of aging, of time passing in a tangible way. But I don't regret choosing you. I would make the same choice again and again. Even knowing what you know now, the hunger, the isolation, the weight of watching the world change while we remain the same, especially knowing what I know now. Clara took his face in her hands, those cold, pale hands that matched his own. Because I also know what it means to spend 70 years with someone who sees you completely, who loves you not despite your darkness, but inclusive of it, who chooses you every single night. Nikolai kissed her forehead. I'm the one who should be grateful. Then we're both lucky. They stood together in the garden, two immortals surrounded by flowers that bloomed in darkness and understood what most humans spent their entire lives searching for. That home was not a place, but a person. That eternity was bearable when shared. That love, real love, could survive anything, even death itself. A child's voice echoed from the house. Clara, Nikolai, I'm hungry. They both turned. Through the window, they could see the girl, maybe 6 years old, dark hair, bright eyes. They had found her 3 years ago in an alley much like the one where Clara and Nikolai had first met. Orphaned, starving, abandoned. They had taken her in. She was human still, would remain human if she chose. But she had a home now, safety, love. And when she was old enough to understand, they would give her the same choice Clara had been given: life in sunlight alone, or eternity in darkness together. Coming! Clara called. She squeezed Nikolai's hand once before heading inside. He followed, watching as she swept the child into her arms as the girl laughed and hugged her back. 3 generations of rescued souls, Nikolai thought. The vampire who forgot he was human, the child who reminded him, and now this new child who would teach them both what it meant to protect innocence instead of consuming it. The cycle of redemption continued. And Nikolai Ashford, who had wept for the first time in centuries when a child called him good, finally understood that salvation was not a destination, but a choice, made every night, in every act of kindness, in every moment of choosing light over darkness. He was a monster still. The hunger never left, the curse remained unbroken, but he was also a guardian, a teacher, a father of sorts, and most importantly, he was loved, completely, eternally, impossibly loved. And in the end, that made all the difference. Subscribe if you believe mercy can resurrect even the damned, and that monsters can choose to become something more. Like if you'd choose eternity for love that sees your soul completely, darkness and all. Comment eternal if you believe redemption is not about erasing the past, but choosing better in every moment that follows. Every immortal was once someone who chose not to die. But the rarest immortals are those who choose not just to survive, but to live, to love, and to believe that even in endless darkness, light can be found in another's eyes. This has been a blood and mercy story, where mortality meets eternity, and love transcends both.